Okay, so we're going to go through the behavior chain. And the behavior chain is a key link of events on how we actually end up doing things and how we get to the reality of our lives, what's happened to us, where we are in our lives is not an accident, it's something we create. And the behavior chain is a very, very useful way of seeing what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. So to understand the behavior chain, know first that you have 5 senses, only 5 senses: sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. And those 5 ways, you've got receptors for those 5, are the only ways that you interact with the world. You cannot see x-rays, for example, because you don't have receptors for those x-rays. So those 5 senses are the way that you interact with the world. So on the behavior chain, the very first thing that we look at is a stimulus or a trigger. So what happens before anything is you have a stimulus or a trigger. Something happens with those 5 senses, and then you get a stimulus, and that stimulus then leads to the second part of the behavior chain, which is a thought. And I call it your first thought. So your instant thought when you see a stimulus or triggered might be to get angry. You see someone being mean to someone else, and then you get angry, and you think to yourself how unjust that is. And that is the first thought that you might have. And then the third one would be a second thought, but we'll leave that for now because that takes a while to come about. So we see something, we hear something, we taste something, we touch something. We then have a thought about that. Then what we do is we have a feeling. So next, that thought, that thing that we've experienced, we feel, and that feeling starts to go down throughout our body. And of course, that's what our nervous system's doing. It's sending signals, neuro meaning brain, neurochemically, molecules are going around sending these thoughts and stimuluses down into emotions and feelings. So once a behavior, something happens in the behavior chain that gets to the feeling level, you are well into it, And then after that feeling comes down, the next step on the behavior chain is an action. We actually do something, we respond to that. So, we see something, we might walk over and say something to a person, and that is the action. We might be harsh, we might respond in a learned way, it doesn't matter, but we have now moved into action, actually doing something. And, we always say behavior doesn't lie, so it's a nice, easy thing. We can see who you are by how you do things. Are you an angry person? Your behavior is going to tell us far more than your thoughts will. So deeper down the behavior chain. And then we get to the last part of the behavior chain, which is consequences. So, a stimulus, a thought, a feeling, an action, and then the consequences of that action. So you might go out and drink 10 tequilas thinking with your thought that you're going to have a great time. You might even feel it. You probably won't behave the way you thought you would behave. And then the consequences might be you driving into a ditch. If you're an addict or something, you'd attend rehab yet again, you'd feel ashamed, and so on and so forth. So that is the behavior chain, and you can interrupt that behavior chain at any given time. So I've added that second thought to the behavior chain. Sorry, science, but we've added a column. And that second thought is really much of the work that we do. So contemplation, thinking about thinking, is really putting in that second thought. So I can be triggered, something that triggers me easily is something I can work with. And, then I will have a thought and I can stop it right there and think about it again and say, whoa, look at the consequences. Now your brain can't do consequences very well. Look at what's going to happen if I do this, that, and the next thing. So to have a second thought is to play the tape through. To have a second thought is to really reconsider, reevaluate things. And that's really a wise mind. You don't want to be running around being, acting with your emotional mind, acting irrationally and so on. Rather, play the tape through and look at a behavior chain. And you can even write it down. It's 5-6 columns. And then look at the end, at the thought. Look at that last thought and see, what do I really, really want to do? And then go down the behavior chain from that thought. If I act on my impulse, I'm going to be angry, I'm going to lose my peace, and so on and so forth. Go above it. Have a second thought. Give it some time. Obviously, a second thought takes longer. And don't be so impulsive. If you work a behavior chain, you end up with better consequences. Now remember, your brain can't do consequences really well. It's so busy with that first thought and the emotion, it just wants to act on that. So lastly, a very short behavior chain is thought, feeling, and action. And if you go from thought straight into action, you're going to have terrible consequences. Thought, feeling, let it sink in, and then you take action from there. Don't be impulsive, don't be reactive, rather learn how to respond and learn to interrupt your behavior chain, to rise above it. That is the story of healing and transformation.